The Legend of Jimmy Spoon by Kristiana Gregory, Chapter 18, Nahanee. Once again, lodge covers were folded into travas, and a slow journey was begun. Mushaki's band headed for open country, traveling south for 7 days along the Paiupa, through the valley that one day would be named Jackson Hole. Jimmy tried to count all the Indians stretching ahead of him and behind him, but there were too many. To the west, the Tetons, their crags white with snow, even in the summer, towered over a string of lakes. The surrounding grasslands were spotted with stands of pine and aspen. A black bear and her cubs meandered through a marsh bordered by huckleberry shrubs. Where the Paiupa had eased west, the women raised teepees and lit cooking fires. The river was narrow, but deep enough for diving, which was what most of the boys began doing. Jimmy was pleased to notice Nahanee watching him from her mother's lodge. He fancied himself quite a swimmer, and this was a perfect chance to show off his diving skills. With a flourish, he stretched his arms into an arc and tilted his chin toward the sky. He bent his knees and sprang, launching himself into the river. The sudden slap of his skin on the surface knocked the breath out of him, bringing giggles from the audience. Jimmy came up gasping. He had done a spectacular belly flop. Thunder rumbled through the darkening clouds. Steam rose from the warm earth as raindrops fell, releasing the fragrant smell of sagebrush. Jimmy sat inside the lodge with Hanabi and Baby Odo. Old Mother stirred fresh yamps into a pot, simmering over the fire. Jimmy enjoyed the sound of rain against the tent. By afternoon, the sun was out, and the earth felt clean and fresh. Jimmy wandered around camp. It fit Old Mother's requirements. Good grass, good wood, good water. When he looked back at his teepee, he noticed that it stood on the northeast side of a cottonwood tree. Jimmy marveled at the precise way Old Mother had raised their lodge. It was just out of reach of the dripping leaves, yet close enough for shade and protection from the wind. Like the other teepees in camp, it was squat, about 12 feet high, and the doorway opened to the morning light. Old Mother often explained why. The Creator gave us the sun to make us warm and to make all things grow. This is the first thing we see after our sleep. We give thanks for each new sun. Jimmy followed a trail along the river. A family of raccoons was on the bank, dipping paws in the water. He sat on a mossy log to watch. The mother raccoon hooked a crayfish and flung it onto the muddy bank, where her 3 kits examined it, then batted it playfully. Something stirred in the ferns. Jimmy listened without moving his head. He turned his eyes toward the sound. The noise was not that of a small animal, he could tell. It didn't scurry off, and its movements were slow and deliberate. He waited. Minutes passed. The bush rustled again, and out stepped Nahanee. She looked down at her moccasins. "Hello, Dawi." A blush spread over her cheeks. "Hi." He was surprised she was alone, as the women and girls customarily stayed in pairs. Jimmy had never been this close to her. She was more beautiful than he'd realized. She looked soft. He wanted to touch the sleeve of her deerskin dress, where a row of blue and white beads had been stitched by her mother. She sat down beside him. Jimmy thought she smelled of clean, warm skin and campfire smoke. It was nice. He pretended to study the raccoons. "Want to swim?" he asked, uneasy with the nearness of her. But then he remembered his belly flop, and he felt the heat rise in his face. Every time he tried to show off for Nahanee, it didn't work. "Or we could throw rocks," he said quickly. "Bet you can't get one all the way across." She smiled at him. "We don't have to do anything, Dawi. It is nice just sitting here." Her dark eyes matched her hair, which was braided neatly over her shoulders, each end wrapped in a strip of buckskin. Her hair was shiny with the bear grease all the women used. Now Jimmy didn't know what to say. He'd never had trouble talking to his sisters, except maybe Rose, who was only 2, and Clara, bossy Clara. But this was different. There was a flutter in his stomach when he looked at Nahanee. He wanted to show off, to do something so she would like him. "Let's walk," she said, standing. "I know a place. It is quiet and high, and we can see the eagles nesting." As Jimmy followed Nahanee uphill along the river, he noticed how her dress swayed and how her moccasins pressed softly on the trail. Sunlight filtered through the branches, bringing alive the scent of balsam and soil and Nahanee. He touched her arm. When she turned to him, he was overwhelmed with a desire he couldn't understand. As he stared at her, she started walking again. Soon the trail leveled and widened into a clearing. She stopped. Below, the river snaked its way through a valley. Nahanee pointed to what looked like a large, ragged basket nestled in the top of a tree. Barely visible were the heads of two small birds, beaks pointed upwards. Jimmy and Nahanee sat in the afternoon sun, watching, listening. She peeled a pine cone, then shared Deba, the tasty nuts, with Jimmy. Cree! The cry sounded from the sky. Cree! Cree! An eagle circled nearby, gliding toward her nest. Jimmy was close enough to see that her wingspan was wider than he was tall. Her head was white. Clutched in her talons, which were as big as Jimmy's hands, was a limp brown rabbit. For another hour they watched the eagle in the nest. Then she balanced herself on the rim, pumped her great wings, and rose in flight over the valley. Jimmy was filled with awe. Nothing matched the grandeur of this eagle. He looked at Nahanee. Her voice showed the same wonder he felt. He inched his hand toward her hand, and when they touched, she turned to him with a smile. For once, Jimmy had no desire to show off. And that's the end of chapter 18.